Good evening, everyone. Education night. And hello to all of you who will watch this stream later on. Education night. I'm going to first present a video that I did several years ago. And then we're going to talk a little bit about ethnicity, race, religion, color, the color of these leaders, and because the progressives have made color is such a big thing and so important. But really, we're going to look deeper to see what did color really mean amongst these people, amongst these leaders, amongst these religious rulers or religious spiritual leaders. So hello, everyone out there. Thank you for joining me. Now, on with the video. And after the video, we're going to get into depth more. And we're going to talk about more than just the religions presented in this video. I did this video a few years ago. It's pretty good, to the point, and I think you'll enjoy it. Hello there, Spirit Sama. It's so good to see you. But the stream hadn't fully started yet. Oh, you were talking, but the stream hadn't fully started yet. I wonder how that happens. Maybe that's why things don't work very well for me. Anyway, some kind of technical glitch. So hello there, and hello there, Black Samurai. And it's good to see both of you. So let me put this in the stream. Actually, I'm going to take myself out and I'm going to put that in the stream altogether. So you just see, there we go. Cut my mic and I will start the show. Welcome to Wicked Felina. I'm Felina. Did you know, and I do hope there's some Democrats out there listening to me, there's a reason why the left has embraced Islam. It's because it's seen as a non-white religion. Christianity is seen as a European, Western religion. And here's a really funny thing. It's a really funny ha-ha. Well, of the major religions of the world, let's start with Buddhism. Buddha is described, and the early icons of him have gold skin and blue eyes. Buddha had gold skin and blue eyes. Even though he came from Upper India, Nepal, he was technically a Caucasian. And let's go to Islam. There's about 7 places describing Muhammad, blessings and peace be upon him. About 7 places in the Hadiths. And this is something that's known among Muslims. A lot of Muslims in Africa know all about it. Well, about 7 places describe him as the whitest of men. And if you're looking for him, that's how you'll find him. That nothing is whiter than he is. Compared to the other people, he is the whitest. And his white hairs. And they have in a jar, I've got this beautifully covered, was one of his hairs from his beard, and was red. And he painted it henna. He headed it because when he was young, he had red hair. So he had white skin and red hair. So many Muslims dye their beard, even though they're black and they never had red hair, they dye their beard with henna so they can imitate the prophets, not just his life, but what he looked like. Another interesting thing that I just heard recently from a Pakistani Muslim who is not a political Muslim, doesn't follow all those things, a very good man. He said that he was born in England, and this whole thing with Tony Robinson about the girls in foster homes, and there's been thousands and thousands of them for about 40 years that were prostituted out to Pakistani Muslim men. And nobody said anything because they were afraid of being called racist. So they prostituted young girls out to them, 12, 13, 14, possibly younger. And in these countries, and he said, because he was raised a Muslim and he's Pakistani, he said that he's told, and the community tells them, that any girl that's white is just a piece of meat. They're dirt, they're trash. So we think we're always worried about with the Muslim community, no backlash on the Muslim community. But little do we know that in Pakistan, they don't know really that only if they did know. See, Pakistan is a construct. It's not really a country. It is a part of India, and the Muslims moved there because they were warring with the Hindus, and tens of millions of Hindus were killed because they wouldn't convert to Islam. So they're in Pakistan. If only these Pakistani Muslims read the Hadiths and they realize that Muhammad, blessings and peace be upon him, was white and had red hair. So the women, the young girls that they're defaming, that they're treating like trash, are the same color as their prophet. But they don't know this. See, so there is discrimination. People of all shades discriminate. And it's good that Tommy Robinson was let free. He was only reading out of the Guardian in front of the courthouse. He was just reading out of the Guardian, something that had already been printed. It's a sad thing about it. And he went to jail and they tortured him there. And he was an extremist at one time, but he saw the light. And he's just a hardworking, regular guy. And he saw that there was an injustice being done. And he let the people know about it. But I think it's terribly interesting that, see, and the Louis Farrakhan and Africa. They believe that Christianity is the religion of the white man, and Islam is the religion of the black man. And when Islam came here and Muhammad Ali was converted, he wanted to belong to a religion that was a black man's religion, not a white man's. He didn't read the hadiths either. He didn't know the truth. There's many hadiths. Sahih al-Bukhari, which I own the entire set, Sahih Muslim, Sunnah Abu Dawood. Those are the top 3. There's many of them. And little do they know, and little does the left, who went from the man is always wrong when abuse is going on, it's always the man that does it. And beating a woman and abuse, emotional and physical abuse, is bad. But then the left, Hillary, too, embraced Islam, which says in Surah 434, verse 34, that if you think that your wife might be thinking independently, you could banish her to beds apart and then beat her into submission. And that there's a version for the West, particularly for the West, that says beat her added the word softly, but the word softly is not in the original Arabic Quran. It isn't. It made it more palatable if you beat her softly. But in Islamic countries, these women, they wear white. They're put in the middle of a stadium where everybody watches, and they're beaten until the blood comes through their white garments. So if I was a Muslim woman, I would certainly watch my P's and Q's and do everything my husband wanted me to do. I would be very good at that. These poor women are probably the best women, the best people in the world. I feel sick. And David Cameron, the Prime Minister, said, well, they should learn English. That way they can go to a women's shelter and report it. And then he was condemned for being Islamophobic. So you're Islamophobic if you speak English and can report that you're being beaten up. Well, you certainly don't want to do that because there's going to be a big backlash in the Islamic community because it's the law in the Quran. And the left has embraced this and somehow left. They left women. They left women who were abused. And I guess only white Christian men can be put in jail. It's not any man who beats his wife. Doesn't matter color, skin, or religion, I don't care. We shouldn't care. That part we shouldn't care about. As Martin Luther King really, really, really tried to tell us, but we're not listening to him. See, we're not listening to Martin Luther King, who did it peaceful, marched peacefully, and he rejected the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers wanted to do riots in the streets and beat white people up and do the burnings and the riots and all that stuff. Like when Obama was first elected, they were in front of the polling place and they had clubs, billy clubs, intimidating white people. So that's against the law. You can't be intimidated. You should be able to vote for who you want to vote for. But Eric Holder, the Attorney General, said, I don't want to send any more of my people to jail. So you let them go. So you can see that between the two, the Martin Luther King and Black Panthers, the Obama administration seemed to follow by supporting everything that went on during that administration. You kind of see what side he may have fallen on, because he was the man that should have come forward and begged for peace and for people to come together. And racism of any kind should be looked down on from anyone. He could have brought us together. He was the perfect person. He could have done it. But something else happened during those 8 years that we may never recover from. And England is suffering. And isn't that interesting? Getting back to religion. Now, Jesus is the religion of the white man. How can that be? The missionaries went to Egypt and India. They went, the apostles went all over. They didn't cross the Atlantic, but they went to all these countries, Lebanon, most of these countries that are now Muslim were Christian across top, Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean. They're all Muslim now, and even part of India is Muslim, but they were Christian first. So Muhammad, who was white with red hair, and I could be related to him actually. My last name is actually Egyptian. It's Egyptian. And it was once a defamatory word in the Middle Ages. And there's a reason why for that. But though I'm white, the funny thing is that Cana, the people of Cana, where Jesus was born, those particular areas from southern Italy to Greece and all through Cana, Israel today, Jordan, Egypt, they're dark-skinned, right? Jesus is actually the only one out of the major religions that was probably a brown-skinned person with dark hair and brown eyes. He's the only one, and he's the one that the world is rejecting. Someone hits you on one cheek, turn, let them hit the other. If someone takes your cloak, give them your coat as well. Give to all who ask of you. A man has no greater love, a human has no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for a friend. I go to lay down my life for you. Love your neighbor as yourself, as you love your Lord, with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. Love one another as I have loved you. Really not a bad religion. Really not a bad religion. And it is the only one that is not white. It's not white. Turkey, also Christian. But it all came down. Islam was spread through fire and sword. That's how Muhammad spread his religion. If you don't convert, that's how it was spread, not through missionaries. So Christianity, as wonderful as Islam is, and if everyone knew that Muhammad was white-skinned and red hair, then people would be throwing roses at me when I walked down the street. White would be it. White would be the in thing. That's amazing if people actually read and studied and knew the truth. People wouldn't be hating on white people. So Jesus, maybe stop hating Christians, because Jesus, he's not so bad. He really isn't so bad. And he's the only one that probably was not white, was dark-skinned. Maybe not black, dark, maybe not that, as dark as that, but he certainly wasn't white. And his religion's not too bad. So if you're going to honor Muhammad, start respecting white people then. And white people should respect people who are not white, because Jesus wasn't white, right? And of course, Buddha's gold. I guess he was royalty. I guess we have to respect royalty too. So that's it for now. Think about what I just taught you. You learned a lot. And share my videos. I'm trying very hard to educate people, to get the truth out, and to stop the civil war that's coming. Okay, thank you. I appreciate if one of you does it, one or even two, oh my God, that would be really helpful for all of us, right? One little kiss from Felina. Goodbye. Hello out there. So it's not a pro white and it's not a pro not white. It's to wake up Christians. There's no reason to hate anyone who is not white or to look down on someone who is not white, because Jesus was most likely not white. And it isn't that you should throw roses at my feet, but if during that time when I made the video, it was the progressives, the Democrats, it was the absolute in religion, and definitely is among the progressives, and they can find no fault with Islam. So if you find no fault with Islam, and the leader of Islam is the whitest of men with red hair, then his hair turned white. He was the whitest person in the descriptions of the Hadith that ever lived. Then how could you, as a progressive, or if you love Islam, and how could you hate white people? You know, it's kind of like when you realize the truth that color is irrelevant. It seemed to be rather seen in the Quran, if you read the Hadith, that it was seen in Islam as a good thing. I'm not saying that that is the correct way to look at a color of someone's skin, because the color of someone's skin is not the color of their heart. The color of someone's heart, and I would say the color meaning the goodness of someone's heart and soul, has nothing to do with the color of their skin. It's quite anti-scientific, isn't it? And it's quite backwards that we should not judge someone if no better was wrong to judge people based on their skin tone. If it was dark, and that doesn't mean that they're bad or any. That was wrong. That was so wrong, and we all know it. And America rendered itself apart. 600,000 men died, and most of them were white, to end slavery. Yet that blood and the bloodiest battle of the Civil War was more bloody and had more casualties than all the wars in World War II. It was so bad, and there was no anesthesia. People had their arms and legs blown off, or they cut them off of their bodies so they wouldn't get gangrene, or if they got gangrene. And there was nothing to knock them out. There was no anesthesia. There was nothing to kill the pain. You're lucky if you got some alcohol, but you felt the whole thing. And that was all to end slavery. So how evil were those men when most of those 600,000 men that died were white? And when you look at the whole idea of, if you're going to look at the world as a whole and think about the religions of the world and the people of the world, Buddha, the thing that set this particular stream off today was something that when I was going to just put this on Rumble, and I was going to just put that video on Rumble. And then as I was grabbing the thumbnail to create a new thumbnail, it set me off because the progressives have rewritten history, rewritten Buddhism, essentially. I was the only, I'm not going to say white, because that's ridiculous, because in Tibetan Buddhism, the goddess Tara appears as white or green. And white Tara is the healing. She appears white. In fact, I have pictures of her. I've got a picture of her there. I have green Tara underneath here. There's another white Tara over there. I could take her off the wall and show you, but and bring it over here. Well, white Tara is for healing. You pray to her for healing. Green Tara is for when you want to pray for meditation. But she's literally green or literally white. And I was the first or only non-Tibetan to work at a Tibetan store. They asked me to work. The store that I worked at was closing. And they knew me and they wanted me to work there. So I did. And so I learned a lot about Tibetan Buddhism. They had books, and I bought many of those books that came directly from Tibet, written by the Dalai Lama. In it says that the mark of a Buddha is that many things. He has this broad shoulders, long, elegant arms. There's some features that are similar that I have, but one feature that I don't have is that I'm not a man. And in Buddhism, you can't attain enlightenment if you're a woman. You can only attain enlightenment in a man's body. And a woman, even if she is a Buddhist nun for 50 years, and a novice male monk comes in, a child, she has to bow to him. People don't realize this about Buddhism. And they say Christianity is the one that's misogynistic. And when the witnesses that Christ had at his tomb, the witnesses to his resurrection, the ones that were at the feet of his cross as he died, were all women, and the men ran away. But the first witness to his resurrection was a woman, because she was there. She didn't run away. That's what makes, they said, people say, well, it can't be true, because they used women as the witnesses, and women were only worth half that of a man. And you can't use them as a witness in court. So the fact that women saw it means that it probably didn't happen, or there were hysterical women making something up. Well, if they were making it up, they would have just written that men were there. If you were making it up, you would sell it right. And also Jesus wouldn't have died, because that's a failed Messiah. The fact that they actually wrote that means that it tells me that it must have happened, don't you think? The idea that you would reuse a woman women, and one gospel, it says the men went to check for sure, because then nobody's going to believe unless the men check. But the fact that they used women, and then they went out to sell the faith, basically as missionaries, to sell the faith, a faith that seemed quite absurd, a failed Messiah because he died, and women who saw him rise again. In those days, you would not do that. That would be embarrassing. That's why they were hidden until they received the Holy Spirit. And that's what gave them the strength and the zeal to go out and preach the gospel. Something that is the key, that something happened to change it. Because in those days, you would never sell that religion. You would never say if somebody rose from the dead, that the Messiah failed and was killed, and women were the witnesses at the tomb. You would never do that. You would never go out there and sell that to anyone. The fact that it was even sold to thousands of people. They say 5,000, they converted 5,000 that day when they received the Holy Spirit. And the fact that people bought that immediately means that it would denote that, yeah, the Holy Spirit was present, because it would take God, it would take the presence of God to shine through and to show people that something really did happen. We're not just telling you a story. Most people would just have walked away. This is absolutely ridiculous. Women are not credible witnesses. Not only do people not raise from the dead, but he's a failed Messiah. But it was sold to countries. It was sold to countries that women were second in. Women were below men. This was a very misogynistic world. And I think that's the reason why the apostles were picked as men, because if women went out, they could be raped. They could be killed immediately before the religion was spread. It had to men that went out because they were putting their life in danger, and they ended up dying in horrible ways. And John took care of Jesus's mother. And you needed, in those days, you needed a man in the house to protect an older woman living alone, protect her. Of course, I'm sure there's taunting people who didn't believe that he rose. He wasn't the Christ. You had to protect her from that too. But you see how was this even sold in a time when nobody would believe a woman? Whereas in the places that they went, even when you go to Iran, Zoroastrianism, a woman can't be a priest. Women are also lesser. Certainly in Islam, women are half that of a man. And we won't go into that, but it isn't a religion that you would use a woman as a witness. You need two women just in case one is in error, the other will correct her. Even if you go into India, Hinduism, women are second to men. It's not that kind of religion either. The women bring shame. I mean, this is the world that it was in. So when I think about, what Jesus, if Jesus wasn't white, why did Muhammad Ali, it's a true story, Muhammad Ali, his name was Cassius Clay, born Cassius Clay, and he's changed his name to Muhammad Ali because he didn't want a white man's name. And he changed it to the name of a prophet that had black slaves. In fact, it was the Africans who won the war, the stronger tribes would win the war, and they would take the other tribe as slaves, and they would trade the slaves. And they were trading them with the Arabs first. So Muhammad was getting black slaves as from Africa. And he had a particular name that he called, it was not a nice name, that he called people from sub-Saharan African, which I won't say. So if Muhammad Ali heard that, if he knew about that, he might not. There's a video by David Wood, yes, called Muhammad the White Prophet with Black Slaves. So he didn't realize that. And when the Western world ended slavery, Arabia continued the slave trade. And it was the Western world that went, 2,000 sailors died, to stop these slave ships from taking slaves from Africa to Arabia. But getting back to Muhammad Ali's original name, Cassius Clay, he gave up that name because it was a white man's name. And Cassius Clay was a Christian. He was a preacher. He was a minister. And he went to countries that had slavery to try to end slavery. So he rejected the name of a man who obviously he was Christian, who lived his life to end slavery of Africans, sub-Saharan Africans in particular, and took on the name of a white prophet who had black slaves. That's extremely shocking. I wanted to dip in a little bit into the Aztec religion as well, and the whole idea of, is it really, were the English privileged? Did they feel that they were privileged? Well, the upper classes did. The people with money, the nobles, the royals, they were privileged. The people in Ireland, they considered not white. They were poor. They starved them out. They were absolutely horrible too. Even when there was a sultan that wanted to give, during the Irish potato famine, thousands of dollars, huge amount of money to save these people from famine. And he couldn't give more than the Queen Victoria was queen at the time. He couldn't give more than that, than she gave, because that would humiliate her. So instead of her raising her amount, he had to lower his amount. So when you look at Irish people, you say, well, are they privileged? Well, at one time they came to this country. They were so emaciated from the famine that they were sold instead of killing them. See, England used to, if you stole anything and you were a poor person, to them it's there's no difference. To them, it would say, well, they must be black. To them, it's like you would say they were blacks. That's the only way progressives can understand it. But they weren't black. They were white like them, but they were not privileged. They were the underclass. It's about an underclass. So they decided, instead of just, they used to kill you. If you stole the smallest thing, you were killed. Like it's recorded in their court documents that a woman who was poor, she borrowed a hand trowel just to plant plants at her home. And that was considered stealing from the wealthy man she was working at. Isn't that she wasn't going to bring it back? But that you were hung for things like that. And thousands of English were hung for petty crimes just because they were poor. There was no value to human life. So you would have to say these people were not privileged. And there was something called an oubliette, which is means in French the forgotten, where wealthy people, and this wasn't done when they had slaves, got slaves from Africa. They were doing this to white people. Because in fact, you didn't do it just because they paid for the slaves. And so you wouldn't throw them in an oubliette because you paid a lot of money for a slave. Unless you were an indentured servant, they were very cheap because they were emaciated and they wouldn't be living long. So they were sent on boats over to America, which they never lived to see freedom because they were basically worked to death. They were cheap and they were going to die anyway, so they basically worked them to death. But in oubliette, which only white people were thrown in, unfortunately. I hate to use the word white and black. It's just insane. But it was before the time the African slave trade, which the Africans were selling their own people because they were the winners of the war, and they would chain them up and bring them to the coast and trade them for guns. That way they would get the guns so they could win more wars and get more people to get more stuff. And that was from people, the winners, the nobles or the kings or the stronger tribes took advantage of the more vulnerable tribes. So there was a thing called an oubliette, which means when they wanted someone to disappear, and usually you were just poor. You were just poor. Nobody knew you. Nobody cared about you. You were filthy. You probably wouldn't live long because they were working you to death anyway. So what they would do is there was a big iron cover, and it was a hole that was dark, and there were spikes at the bottom. And what they did was they would throw you down there, and you'd land on the spikes, and they put the iron cover over it so they wouldn't hear your screams. And every castle had one of these, or very, very wealthy mansion, but every castle had one. And so you would land on another dead, decaying body, and you would die there slowly. So when we think about privilege, you have to rethink privilege, because they didn't care what color skin you were. If you stole someone's sheep, right, their livestock, that was automatic death. That was on the books. And people who were white were doing that and being hung or shot or killed immediately, because it was always the death sentence. When they came over here, white settlers or people from Spain and Portugal came over here and went to South America, they had livestock. They brought over livestock, and the indigenous people would take some of the livestock, and they were killed. And to this day, because they're told that they were killed because of the color of their skin, they weren't white. And it isn't true. That was the law. Poaching, the punishment for poaching was death. And in Europe, that's what they did to everyone. And everybody in Europe they were doing it to were all white. The only difference is that there was a lower class. They were just the lower class. They were nobody. They were poor. They weren't going to live long anyway. Human life meant nothing. Now, this is the thing that set me off. I'm going to read it to you today, because technically, I was Googling the picture, and why did Buddha have blue eyes? Blue eyes, an Indo-European race. Blue eyes and the Indo-European race. Buddha was born in northern India approximately 2,500 years ago to a group of people called the Sakyans, who were described as Indo-Aryan race, known to have Caucasian bodily features such as blue eyes and lighter skin. And when I worked for the Tibetan store, I read the different features of the Buddha. One thing is he's got He has a third eye that looks like a spiral, like a conch shell. And he has lotuses on the palms of his hands and the palms of his feet, like the imprint of a lotus. Very long, graceful arms, wide shoulders, like you would call the different kind of hands. Every hand, earth, air, water hands, earth, air, water, fire. Water hands, long fingers, long oval palm. But it's described in every book that I ever read that was an authentic book from Tibet or Buddhism, because I read books on Tibetan Buddhism as well as Buddhism from India. Buddha had a Buddha, a Buddha means that you're enlightened, has yellow skin, particularly yellow skin, because something about yellow skin is above everything, because it means that you've reached the golden state. And Buddha had gold skin. It means that you have reached the golden state. And I was looking down, I was looking through some other articles as I was looking for the pictures. And I read this, and this is what made me say, the show tonight, I'm not going to just put the video out so I can get it on Rebel, because you can no longer, YouTube doesn't allow you to move your videos over to Rumble anymore. Just do an automatically transfer. So I was just going to do the video. So I read this, and I'm going, the progressives have truly rewritten history in regards to you're just simply evil because you're white. It doesn't matter if your people didn't used to be considered white. You're all of a sudden privileged, even though your people used to be considered black and the bottom of the barrel and criminals or stupid. Because now you're designated as white, all of a sudden, the whole history of your life is privileged, which is absolutely absurd, because to this day, Northern Italians say anything south of Rome is Africa, and they describe them as lazy. And the reason why the Northerners work hard, that's why they have money, and the Southerners don't, because they're lazy. You see, they to this day, and I know there are Northern Italians in this country, believe it or not, who still think that way about Southern Italians. So this country considered Southern Italians as black as well, and treated them like garbage, and put them in jobs that literally would kill them, and they couldn't go to the police when a crime was committed against them. Even though you've suffered terribly in your life, you're all of a sudden privileged, because all of a sudden the designation went from black to white. But people from Mexico, by law, were designated as white as far as immigration goes, and as many per year that wanted to immigrate here could under U.S. law. So they went from white to not white. People from Arabia were always considered Caucasian. Of course, anybody on one side of the Caucasus Mountains is Caucasian. Caucasus Mountains, that's what it is. And the other side is considered not white. So even Native Americans are Caucasians. But this particular, let me read this to you. Was Buddha a blue-eyed, light-skinned Aryan? According to the 32 marks of a great man, his skin was gold. The gold color is similar to brown or light brown, so definitely not white. as you can see, that made me decide that this stream tonight was going to be more than just the video that I put up. That is not true. His skin was gold. He was a crown. In fact, he was privileged. He was born in privilege. He was the crown prince. He was going to be the king. He had many, many, many concubines. He had all the food he could eat, all the delicacies, all the finest things to wear. He came from privilege. That is privilege. There were Chinese people who came to this country that built the railroads that were not treated well. They worked really hard and died working to build the railroads. But if the Emperor of China came over here, the Emperor of China would have been treated with privilege. You see, just because somebody, and Chinese people do have a yellow tone to their skin. But the reason why we've named races by color, the Chinese people came from the east side, the west side of the Yellow River. It was called the Yellow River. So they were designated yellow people. Not that they were yellow, but because they lived on that side of the river. Just like Caucasians, they lived on this one side of the Caucasus Mountains. So he's privileged. And why would you take a man that is technically probably maybe the same skin tone as people in China or Korea and say that, well, actually, they're actually brown or dark brown? Probably not. We know that the language of India is it's connected to our own language. It's a Eurasian language. Some of the letters are the same, like father is pater. It comes, you'll see that many of the words are actually the same because people came in and brought the language in. It doesn't mean they were white. I don't care what color skin they are. But this whole idea that just because he's in India, it has to be brown. So you've changed the color of his skin. Skin was probably not brown. And in China and Japan, we have makeup here that we call brightening makeup. It used to be called whitening. In Japan and China and Korea, they have makeup called whitening makeup because they believe that whiter skin, a woman believes if a woman has the whiter skin, she's more beautiful. That's their culture. That's what they think. It's not that they're racist or that white people are more beautiful. It's just, what do you call that? These people are, this is, so if this race of people actually thinks that lightening their skin, a woman with lighter skin is more beautiful, or they feel they're more beautiful with lighter skin, I mean, I'm not going to judge that as being racist. It's just an idea. That's where you see the geishas, their skin is white. They put white makeup, really white. I mean, actual white on their skin. And to this day, so in this country, we call it brightening. There, it's still called whitening. But the Buddha had gold skin. He is considered gold skin, 1, because he's enlightened, 2, because he's godlike, 3, because he was a prince. He was the crown prince. And there wasn't a icon, which they believe God enters the icon, or the enlightened being enters the icon, and you put prayers inside of these gold statues. Either as bronze, but covered in gold. And I should have bought when I was there because the price of went up sky high. But they're all gold. Buddha is always shown as gold. He's never shown as light brown or brown. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's that they believed his skin was gold or white, closer to white with a tinge of yellow. And this is somebody who lived or worked with actual Tibetan people, worked for Tibetan people, read their books. And this whole progressive idea that they have to change what the definition of what a Buddha is. They have defined what a Buddha is. I didn't define what a Buddha is. Okay, that's not my definition, but always the definition, there's yellow skin, light yellow skin, because he shines like the sun. And that's what it is. Do not change it to light brown or dark brown, brown or dark brown. That is not the description. That's insulting a people, an entire race of people, and they're insulting their religion, because this is what they believe the mark of a Buddha is, and the way the Buddha looked. And he's always pictured with blue eyes. So maybe he did have light skin. I wasn't there, but the people who described him 2,500 years ago, I think would be more correct than some progressive today. Just one more thing that I was going to throw. I'm going to throw this in. I'm going to read something to you, which is kind of a little shocking, something that I learned a few years ago. And it's going to throw into question even more so. We know that stronger tribes that had more people in it, would fight the weaker tribes and then take them all as slaves and then sell them, trade them as slaves. They're the ones who put them in cages and put chains around them and brought them to the coast. And of course, South America, you have the Aztecs, who sacrificed 5,000 to 6,000 of their own people a day, and everybody was the same color, and they were all of the same race, you would say, even if you don't say the color of the skin, yes, was the same, but they were the same. But you had their holy people felt that they were better than the people below, just like the people in England saw the same thing. The poor people down here, we can throw them in the oubliette. We can hang them if they steal basically an apple. You can be stolen. You can be killed for stealing an apple. In Arabia, you steal something, they cut your hand off. Every single Friday, they have, for festivities, they get together a bunch of people who are below the people on top, who are all the same race and all the same color, and they behead them just for sport. So the people in you know about the Aztec sacrifices, 5,000 or 6,000 a day. They would march up these pyramids and cut their hearts out alive. And then the priest would take a bite out of the heart to appease the gods, because the gods wanted blood. And or they would flay them alive by removing their skin in one piece and then wear it. But that was shamanistic, you see. It was shamanistic. See, this whole progressive idea that anything that's shamanistic is good, when it's not always good, or anything anybody who is not white who does something must be good, and the white person must be bad. I'm sure it was the shock for the Spaniards and the Portuguese when they saw this occurring. And they thought, well, our God, you don't have to do all this bloodletting for your God. Our God died. And that's when the missionaries came over and changed, converted people. You kind of see why. And when they saw that the Portuguese and the Spaniards were mistreating the people, in the Americas, they wrote the Pope, and the Pope wrote back and said that, made a papal decree that these people are children of God. You must treat them as such. But nevertheless, so the people of South America, would you judge them as privileged? Would you judge the people who are descendants of those priests that cut the hearts out of people alive, the kings, the ones that they cannibalize them too? Would you consider them privileged? I would say that was privilege. Same color, privilege. Or some of these people are descendants of the white invaders. Remember the Spanish and the Portuguese. It wasn't the English that conquered. It was actually the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Spanish actually have a lot of Celtic in them. Most of them have a lot of Celtic. It's more when you get to Italy and Greece that you get darker skin. Southern Italy, not northern. I have to say that because the Northerns to this day think they're white, and anything south of Rome is Africa. So that's how ludicrous this all is. That's how ludicrous this all is. So the people coming from South America, well, are they descendants from the priests, from the kings who sacrificed all these people, who are the exact same race, exact same skin color? Are they descendants of the white invaders, of the Spanish and the Portuguese, who they say did horrible? They took the land and they treated the people horribly, didn't cut their hearts out, didn't flay them alive, and didn't cannibalize them. But nonetheless, they took their gold. I believe they enslaved them. But they also South America, they got 95% of the slave trade. They came from Africa. That transatlantic slave trade. South America got 95%. And America got 5%. So they got 9,500,000 slaves from South America. From Africa. And America got 500,000. Yet we're told that everybody south of the border, even if they're descended from the invaders, the Spanish or Portuguese, even if they may be descended from the priests and the kings that cannibalized and cut the hearts out of thousands of people a day alive, flayed them alive, took their skin off in one piece, that we're privileged, even though our ancestors weren't even here when America was even conquered. When my people came, they were considered black. Both sides, my father and my mother's side, were considered black and were given jobs at the bottom of the barrel that I don't know how they survived. And they couldn't go to the police when all their money was stolen from them. The police would not, because they were considered black. And that time, the Irish were considered white. It's like the Irish, it changed. And then they started marrying each other. Then it was okay. You realize they were all Catholic, and so you've got a lot of Irish Italians marrying each other. But for that time, so nothing to do with. So the concept of who was bad and what was bad is kind of like a mind F, isn't it? Who was bad and what actually was bad? What is bad? Does white really mean bad? Let me read you something that's maybe going to be the kicker of this whole thing. It's going to be like the biggest shocker of everything I've talked about tonight, as much as when you really think, that the Nazis escaped to South America. They went to Argentina, they went to Brazil. So the people coming to the border could be descendants of Nazis. And I thought they were privileged. So when you look at us who are mixed, somehow because we were born in the United States, it makes us privileged, even though none of our ancestors or our lives, if you sit down and you talk to us, were ever privileged and still aren't. I got a demand letter from the city as of Thursday they may take my house. I'm not freaking privileged, but I know that my state is a sanctuary state, and we have tons and tons of people that have come over the border. But I don't know who they're descended from, but because they have, some may have more melanin, that makes them not privileged. But to get here, they have all their life savings to get here, or their life savings to get here is about, they give the cartels, it's about $10,000 to come over to America, and they arrive in Panama, Costa Rica. We have a station down there, and so we know who they are. We take bioscans and all that stuff, and they have fake passports, and they drop them in the jungles. I learned this from CIS, Center for Immigration Studies, by the way. And what happens is they give the drug mules $40,000 to bring them to the border. And when they get to the border, they say, well, where do you want to go? I want to go to New York City. This is before, this is when Obama was in office. This has been happening for a long time. So that's more money than I will ever have. So I don't know what you get privilege. That's more money than I will ever have in my entire life. So all these people, it's like, how do you know they're not privileged? What is your idea of privilege? When people in their own nations, when the Emperor of China would not be treated in the same way as the people of China, he would be treated with privilege coming to America. So it's nothing to do with the color of the skin. And I am so sick of hearing, they only mention the Japanese internment camps in America by FDR, the Democrat president. They never, to this day, ever mentioned that the Italians were sent there too. They sent them in trains across the country in dark cabins. They couldn't even see the light. And there's a man standing in back with a machine gun. Frightening. And they lost everything. But to this day, no politician, nobody. It's only Japanese, because the thought that the Japanese are not white and the Italians were actually white when they were actually designated black in this country. Oh, another thing about color, which is, remember I told you about the Yellow River? That's the reason why people from Asia are called yellow. There is a glow to the skin that has a yellow glow, but that yellow glow, I think part of it is that it's that because Buddhism used to be really big, and it's no longer, because China is communist, but it used to be main Confucianism. They had several different kinds, but that they were closer to enlightenment because of this yellow glow in their skin. So that was a part of it, that their race was closer to enlightenment, which, it's a shame that they can't practice that anymore. But the idea of color and why color came from, why we say color, and the Native Americans in this country, the reason why they're called red isn't because their skin is red. Their skin certainly isn't red. They're descended from, actually related to people from Russia as well as Asia. It's not just, believe it or not. And there's some Celtic too, but nobody wants to talk about that. But the reason why they're called red is, and this is a shocker. This is just a bonus piece of information. And I learned this when I learned about Elvis. A lot, because his great grandmother was Cherokee. She was a Cherokee princess, because her father was the chief of the Cherokee Nation. There was, if you were Native American and you had, either you were called red or you were called white, and they were both Native American. The reason why you got the designation of white was because of remember the flag of surrender? When people, during a war, when you surrendered and you wanted peace, it was the flag of peace. You put most people had some kind of white underwear or something white that they were wearing. They put it on a stick and they waved it, and they said, war is over, we want peace, we surrender. Basically, we want peace with you. So the designation of white was given to the Native Americans first, that wanted peace with the colonists. Colonists weren't called white. The Native Americans didn't call the colonists white. The Native Americans were designated white or red. And the reason why they were called red had nothing to do with the color of the red man, nothing to do with the color of their skin. The reason why is that the English, of course, this was a complete lie to get them to use the Native Americans and their flesh and their strength and their fighting skills to win the war against the colonists. They got them, they inducted them into their army. And the English, the British, were called the Redcoats because they wore red coats. That was their uniform. We would call them the Redcoats. So if you sided with the British, you were red. If you sided with the colonists, you were white. Not because the colonists were white. It's because the Native Americans who wanted peace with the colonists, I'm not going to say the white man. So do you see how crazy the idea of color is? And the idea of you're not white, you're red, or you're brown, or you're this, or you're that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you talk to any Buddhist, you talk to a Tibetan who, people who have studied this their whole lives, Buddha is gold. Buddha is gold because the yellow glowing color, gold. The Buddhists who attain enlightenment, there's one. I had a picture, if you ever watch my old videos or my videos on the Diamond Realm, my channel, The Diamond Realm, there is a picture I have on the wall, and you'll see he looks like he's from China, but his hair is parted in the middle and he has robes. And it's all these different shades of yellow and some oranges. And his heart here looks like there's a sun. His name was Lanto, and I believe you can probably find him online. Supposedly, he made the sun inside of his heart grow so big that you can see the sun shining through his skin. You can see the yellow sun, yellow white hot sun shining through his skin. When they mean gold and white hot and yellow, and that's the perfection of the Buddhist, they do not mean brown or dark brown. That is not what they mean. I mean, I part of what I've done in my life is, apart from learning from the many jobs, learned from the ground up. That's why I know about elderly nursing, taking care, and being paralegal. I learn everything I've done from the ground up. I get at ground level and learn from the ground up. My life study has been studying religions. That's why I have all those Qurans that you saw in the video. I have a whole library of Muslim writings, the Qurans. I have 14 different Qurans because published in different countries, different translations, the hadiths, biographies of Muhammad, that room, I suppose not every wall, but the bookshelves in there, and they're filled to capacity, are all on Islam. And the dog is not allowed in that room because in Islam, Muhammad, he said that Gabriel didn't show up, was supposed to show up one day, and there was a puppy underneath the bed. There was a puppy underneath the bed, and he said that Gabriel didn't show up because the puppy was there. He was afraid of the puppy. An archangel, archangels are huge. I mean, they're huge. They're not the size of a person. They're huge. They're the ones who are armed with swords. There's nothing more powerful than archangel. Saint Michael fights the devil. I have a picture of Saint Michael right here fighting the devil with a spear. I have that there protect me. It's very Italian. No evil spirits are coming in this. I've got one here. I got one in the window. They're not coming in. It's very Italian to do that. But there's no way that an archangel is going to be afraid of the puppy. So he told his men to take the puppy and slaughter it because it scared the angel Gabriel away. So out of respect for Islam, that's a room the dog doesn't go in. So my other books, I've got everything. You name the religion, I have it, and you'd be surprised at how much, even dare I say, the study of magic and even witchcraft. I don't practice witchcraft, but it's a study to know where it came from and its history, and even priests study it just to know what's going on. And it's very interesting. And of course, the history of magic in the ancient world, it's also history, because some of these books are very, very old, and they're old writings from Greek and Rome. And so I like to know where everybody's coming from to really understand them and respect their belief, instead of prejudging their belief and say, somebody told me this about your religion. And when I can say, no, that's not the case. Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that way you have, if you don't know somebody's language, and you don't know their culture, if you know their religion, then I always thought, or this is starting as a very little girl, I thought, I think if I study people, we're talking a little girl, younger than grade school, before I went even into school, I thought, if I understood their religion, then I could connect with people, because I could speak their language, because somebody's religion forms so much about their lives. I thought I could learn more. There are many Muslims coming to this country, and I thought maybe I could understand them better and maybe have better communication, that I showed them, look, I respect who you are. I respect where you come from. I read your books. In fact, you can borrow some of my books. I thought it was a way of bridging things, instead of looking at people who come in from other places and say, oh, they're foreign, or I think they're bad, or I heard their religion is bad, so I don't believe they're bad. There may be something in the religion I don't agree with. And a lot of times people don't even know the history of their religion. Like, there's Mexicans who want to take California, everything back, and they want to change it to Atlan, which is the original name for the Aztec Empire. They were the Mexicanas, but it was originally the Atlan. And they don't know that they actually think that it was Spanish and the Portuguese that did all the dirty work. And so they want to go back to the Aztec religion, but they don't know about all the sacrifices and how bad it was, and that the people were oppressed. And they would go to war just to get people to not just enslave, but to sacrifice. Even if you were slaved, you're sacrificed. And the progressives today will say, well, there's this basketball game that they used to do, and it was originally thought that the winners, if you won, you didn't get killed, and the losers got killed. But the progressives today, the academics said, well, we think it could be that they were fighting to win the game, and the winners were sacrificed because it was an honor to be sacrificed. I mean, do you know how screwed up that actually is? That is so screwed up. I just can't. And they would prepare people for a year for sacrifice, and they would treat them like a god. It was an honor to be sacrificed. And then they would sacrifice, or the children. It was an honor when a child was sacrificed. It was an honor, and the Mayans did that. All of them did that. And I'm not demonizing all the people. I'm demonizing the people who are in charge, just like the people in England who are in charge. The kings and the nobles and the wealthy people with titles, threw people in the oubliette, would kill them for stealing nothing. There was no such thing as murder if you murdered somebody below your class, but they were all white. So it has nothing to do with demonizing people. But if you demonize people in this country because they have less melanin, you have no idea, or they have less melanin, so therefore, or maybe their ancestors, but wait a minute, their ancestors might have done something to somebody who was not white. But the people coming over the border, you could have Nazis, you could have descendants, you do it. because a lot of them are blonde hair and blue eyed, that come from Brazil. You could have Nazis, descendants of Nazis. You could have, you don't know what they think or what they were taught. You have descendants from people who were the kings and the priests, the shamans who sacrificed these people. No matter how much you think it was a great honor to die that way in the most horrific ways, it's an upside down way of thinking, and I don't understand it. It's what people with power, money and power, do to people who are vulnerable, and that's it. There's really nothing more than that. So here's a kicker. This is the punchline here. Okay. I learned about this a while back, and I actually saw a man in Africa. See, the religion is voodoo. Speaking of religion, the religion is voodoo. And that's the religion that was born in Africa, was brought to Haiti, and then hoodoo is actually a mixture of folk magic from Europe, Native American, and voodoo. That's what hoodoo actually is. Sometimes on the web, they just say, oh, it's Native American and African, but they leave the part out that some of it is actually folk magic from Europe. The web, there's so many things on the web, and there's so much more information, and you don't always get the truth unless you studied this before. Well, I saw a man who was considered albino. He's born albino, which means if you're sub-Saharan African, you're born albino. You're born with white skin, and you have light eyes. Usually, your eyes are pink, but you're born white. And so in voodoo, they consider that magical. And so this man had one leg, the other leg was chopped up, his arms were chopped off. And what they did was, because he was born white, you see, the dominant is people who are sub-Saharan African, dark skin, right? They're the ones with the power, right? This man was born white. So they feel that the gods made him white, and that's magic. He's magical. So what they do is, for spells, they keep chopping pieces off of the albinos, and they boil them, and they use them in spells, and they drink it. And so the man is just left, and they chop the private parts off too. That sells for a lot of money. Can you imagine? So is that man, would the progressives call that man, or any albino, whether it be man or woman, would a progressive call them white or black? Has sub-Saharan African black parents, but he was born white. But they considered him magical. But I'm sure they would say that it's a good thing. It's different. It's not racism because it's the same race, and it's their culture, and we're going to have to understand it. Let me read this to you. And I got this off of Yandex because I don't trust Google. I really don't trust. It's mostly, I know when I type something into Google, what they want you to see comes up because there are so many search results. In Tanzania, body parts of albinos are a cash crop of sorts. A complete set of body parts, including limbs, genitals, ears. So they'll take a whole albino and they will just chop them up into pieces. Ears, tongue, and nose can sell for $75,000. The surge in the use of albino body parts as a good luck charm is a result of the kind of marketing exercise by witch doctors who propagate the myth that spiritual potions made out of albino body parts bring good fortune. And that's from modernghana.com. It's spell of the albino, a spell of the albino, modernghana.com. So you can search that yourself. So is that racism? Is that religion? Is Christianity worse than that religion? Maybe they wouldn't chop Jesus up because he's not albino. Was Muhammad Ali mistaken about changing his name from Cassius Clay, a preacher who worked to free slaves? All his life, he kept going across the Atlantic to stop slavery. That was his whole life. And he changed his name to the White Prophet with Black Slave. I'm sure you can find it's a video by David Wood. It's an excellent video full of information if you can find that one. So when the idea of black and white, good and bad, what does color mean? I gave you all these examples of why we call the red man, but the white in Native Americans were called white and red. They were called white first. Christians or Europe wasn't considered white. That whole idea of putting names on didn't come into play originally when the settlers came over from Europe. They called the African slaves black because they had people from Ireland that were the indentured service and the poor people of England that were so poor and so they were starved that they weren't going to live long, that they sold them for nothing, a very small amount. And so they were worked to death because they were going to die soon anyway. So there was had to be a differential between the African slaves and the slaves that were actually from the United Kingdom and Ireland, which people forget that. And of course, then the Chinese, then the Italians. The Italians took the jobs of the freed slaves. The jobs that were really bad, those jobs, they took those jobs, or they were given those jobs. Like my grandfather was trained for 10 years to be a priest, and he decided, I just didn't want to be a priest, just find me a good woman. I don't care anything about her. And he married her sight unseen. And he could speak 9 languages, and he knew math. I used to give him math, and he knew, it doesn't matter what it was. He was really, really smart. But when he came to this country, he intended to go back to Italy. He came to this country just to earn some money because he was so poor. Because after he left the priesthood, he got a job baking bread, and he had a wife and a son, and his daughter died at the age of 2. And so basically, there's one oven for the whole community, and people bring the bread, the dough to break, and he would bake it. So he would work in the hot ovens all day. So he thought he'd come to America temporarily and just make a little money at the greatest women's college in the whole world, the wealthiest in the whole world. And then you had to when you came as an immigrant, there were less Italians that were allowed into America because they were considered black. The darker the skin you were, people from Northern Europe, there was a quota each year. There was a quota for each country. The northerner you were, because they thought they were more educated. It was probably more Southern Italians and Greeks they considered not as educated. There was a quota for even the European countries, but there was no quota from anybody from Mexico. They could come, and they could, as many wanted to immigrate here, could. And it was actually Spain that originally took all those lands away from the Native Americans. All those lands they say we took from Mexico, it was actually Spain owned Texas and California and all those states. And the Aztecs weren't up here at all. They actually originally were the ones who took them from the Native Americans. Of course, that's a whole another story. But the quota for Italy, southern Italy in particular, northern, and Greece were the smallest because they were dark-skinned. They were considered not white in America. The northern Italians said that the southern Italians were part black. So when they came over here, they got the worst jobs of all. So when he came here, he had to have a sponsor. You had to have somebody to pay for everything, your food, your shelter. You had to report to the police to make sure you weren't committing a crime. You couldn't enter the country if you were sick. You had to be detained or sent. You were either detained till you were well or sent back. That was the law. There was no handouts. There was no welfare. There was nothing. You couldn't be homeless or a burden on the state. Those were the conditions. And you had to have a job waiting for you. So you had a job at the best women's college in the world, the wealthiest. And they were building a music hall. And bricks and stones were brought in from all over the world to build this place. And they dumped the bricks. And instead of giving them wheelbarrows or something to carry them for the bricks where they dumped them to the site where they're building the buildings, or just driven the trucks a little further and dumped all the bricks where they were going to build the building, they made the Italians, because they expected them all, they gave them jobs, they expected them all to die. Okay, this is privilege for you. They wanted them to die. They expected them to die. They were just going to work them to death, like the Irish and the English, the ones that were coming over here after the famine, and they were, emaciated. They expected them all to die. So they put the bricks. They put a board on your back, and they piled the bricks on his back. A man who had been in seminary for 10 years, who could speak 9 languages. Who wrote all the letters back to Italy. Nobody could read or write, so he wrote the letters back to Italy for every single Italian immigrant. That's what a good man he was. He had to bring those from the place where they dumped the bricks. It was called a hod carrier to the building site. How humiliating! And then when he wanted to open up a business, he and his wife, he just couldn't do that work anymore. A man who was, you could say, of white skin, from what we would consider a white country, not Britain, not Sweden, let's say, not the Nordic countries. I won't say the country, but he said, "Oh, I'll help you. Give me your money." So very naively, he gave them his money. The guy took off. And he couldn't go to the police because Southern Italians were considered black, and the police at the time were Irish. And that's before the Irish started marrying the Italians. They realized they were both Catholic. Things changed. But because they were considered black, he could not report it to the police. He was humiliated, and he came home, and my grandmother heard a funny noise upstairs, and she went up. She knew something was wrong. So she went upstairs, and she found that he was about to hang himself because he couldn't tell the police. He couldn't go to the police because he was not considered white. And he was humiliated because he had 6 children. 3 of them died. And the door to their house was open because my grandmother, they grew vegetables, and she cooked like crazy. And I mean, she just cooked hundreds and hundreds, just from her hands, she made everything. And anybody, no matter who you were, didn't matter what race, color, religion, anybody was hungry, because that's what Jesus said. When you were hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. So these people who lived by the law of Jesus Christ, Jesus, he's not so bad, kept their door open even to people who were evil to them, and would beat my grandmother when my grandfather wasn't home, throw sand in the food that she was cooking, destroy all the food that she was making, because they thought I was French woman. So it's a French woman. Well, so I won't say the other because people have put, even though they're white, people have made jokes about people from that. I won't say that. But she thought the Italians were dirty. Italians were dirty. They were stupid. They were criminals. They were. So what is privilege and what is color? She was considered dark skin on her passport. They wrote dark because her skin was dark. He was medium. If you put my arm next to his, my arm was white. And my mother would used to look at me and say, "I don't know why you're so white. It must be your father's side. It can't be her side. she has to play my father's side. And this was before all this progressive woke stuff. This was when I was a little kid. This was a long time ago. My mother made me feel uncomfortable about being white. And so when you think, so you really have to question Jesus. He's not a white man religion at all. He came to the Middle East. Christianity took over from Turkey and Greece and the entire Levant, which is ancient Canaan, Jordan and Egypt, and Ethiopia, and into India. These were all non-white, what we call today non-white countries. Though people from Arabia are considered Caucasian, and they range from very dark to very light. In India, they also range from very dark to very light. My brother-in-law is from India, and he said that my father is as dark as me, but my mother is as white as my wife. And they say that Brahmins are Aryans or light skin. Well, he's a Brahmin, and he's dark skinned, and so is his father, but his mother's white. And so that means his mother's family is also Brahmin at the dark. So that's baloney. That's all baloney. So the color of your skin, it's nothing to do with the color of your skin. It's nothing to do with it's just so messed up. So I hope I gave you a bunch of information, and that little information, many of you know that the stronger tribes, the wealthier tribes, went to war with the more vulnerable, weaker tribes, took them all, won the war, and put them in chains and brought them to the coast and sold them, traded them for guns or whatever they wanted from the West. They're the ones who started the slave trade. But also, you just found out tonight about voodoo, and if you're born albino, and God forbid. So I'd like to ask AOC, who came from privilege. My family didn't. My family actually worked the land. She said her family works the land. But even in Puerto Rico, do you know that I've known a lot of people from Puerto Rico. I've even dated Puerto Ricans. I've dated, I realized how many Muslims I've actually been friends with or dated. I mean, since I was like 16 or 17, I was like, it's like, I'm going, that's a lot. Oh yeah, there's several men that were African. And you know what? I just thought of the person, and if I like them or if they liked me, and I never thought anything about race or religion. I love Muhammad Ali. I mean, it's so ludicrous to say that somebody is racist. Anyway, I forgot where I was going with the albinos and that they really oh yeah, Puerto Rico. I was talking to a gentleman who's going to college at a local college. He was very attractive, and me and a girlfriend goes, "Oh, let's get on the bus." He's like so cute. It's like he was Puerto Rican. He's a really handsome guy. And Polaris, I forget his first name, but his last name was Polaris. And I was a teenager. We were maybe 14, 15, 16, something like that, really young. But his last name was, I remember the way he said his name was so beautiful. Polaris. It was so exotic. And so we're talking to him, and we're talking about Puerto Rico, because we didn't know anything about Puerto Rico, and we knew a lot of poor people moved here from Puerto Rico. And a lot of friends I've had, even went to school with, I would sit right next to, because of our names, it was in order of how your name was spelled. So I became friends with a lot of Puerto Ricans, but they were very poor. And I thought that, a lot of Puerto Ricans came here because they were very poor. But they are Americans, but that's the reason why they moved to the States for a better life. And he said, "Oh no, not all Puerto Rico is poor. It's the people who live in the hills. Puerto Rico is very wealthy. And I'm very wealthy, and I'm going to move back to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is really beautiful." So you've got there, so you can't just blanket it. Okay, they're all poor, and you have this whole idea. People got this whole idea of Puerto Ricans, of poor Puerto Ricans, and I was really friends with the poor ones. He's probably the only one I met that was actually wealthy. Oh yeah, there you go, Puerto Rican, AOC. She's Puerto Rican. She is from wealthy stock. Her grandparents lived in York Heights. She went to Boston College. Her father was the head of an architectural firm. They were not people who worked the land. Like, I think first name was Jose Palares. Beautiful. He said that no, the people, the poor people work, but the people who are wealthy don't work the land. We have servants. We have big houses. We have resorts. We have servants. So just because you're Puerto Rican, and you see J-Lo's father, he looks pretty darn white. He's got like golden blonde hair and light skin, and maybe some Spaniard in there, because the Spanish have a lot of Celtic in them. They're more Celtic than anything else, actually. Spain. Talk about Spain. So it's like, no, it's like when you say person of color, but no, there are people in most of the people of Puerto Rico are actually upper class. So when you think of Puerto Ricans and you think of West Side Story, and everybody's like in West Side Story, the white gang and the Puerto Rican gang, and they fight each other. That isn't the way it is. But they move here because there's no opportunity there, and the privilege takes over most of the land. And I didn't realize that. So when she says that she's a person of color, she has no idea. She's a person of flat out privilege. Flat out privilege, just like the wealthy English and the nobles, just like the people in Africa who oppress the vulnerable tribes and sold them out as slaves, just like in Arabia, when you've got the upper class, you've got the royal class, and they just, people who have the beheadings every Friday night for sport. I mean, it's and the Aztecs, you had the shamans, and you had the kings, and then the people from the other tribes or the lower people, thousands a day, they marched up but it was an honor to be sacrificed for the gods, because the gods couldn't have enough blood. They cut the heart, still beating heart out, they take a bite out of it, or they remove the skin in one piece and wear it, but it's shamanistic. You have to think like a progressive. It's shamanistic. You see, that's upper class and lower class, but it's all the same race. Yet the people coming from South America, 9,500,000 sub-Saharan Africans were brought as slaves. 95% of the slave trade went to South America. United States, got 500,000, 5%. So are the people coming over slave owners? Were they the kings that sacrificed the people in the Aztecs or the Mayans or the Toltecs or the Olmecs? Were they the shamans that sacrificed the people, cannibalized the people? Who are these people? Are these people who are coming over from different countries that are coming over the border? Are they the people who sacrifice the albinos, chop them up into pieces because they're magical, because though they're black with black parents, though they're technically sub-Saharan African black parents, they were magically born albino. So you chop them up into pieces because they're magical. So that's not racism. You see, a progressive will say, that's not racism. That's not racism, because it's the same race, so it can't be. Just like Native American tribes who had slaves. That's not racism because it's the same race. Or Egypt had slaves. That's not racism because it's... No, actually, Egypt took slaves from... They had people from Kush, which is sub-Saharan African slaves, who they depicted specifically as sub-Saharan. They depicted themselves differently. Look, I'm part Egyptian, so... I don't know if I'm putting down Egyptians. I don't know what mix I am quite, because now it used to be sub-Saharan African according to the study of the oldest graveyard in Egypt. There's very, very, very little to none sub-Saharan African. And the oldest mummy in Egypt is called Ginger. He had white skin and curly, not afro, curly red hair, like big curls. His name is Ginger, or Ginger Man. And he actually had white skin. So maybe it was a fluke, I don't know. But he was the one, he was naturally mummified, and he was buried in the sand. That's what they used to do, and they were naturally mummified in the sand. Maybe it was a fluke. I don't know. But it was probably a mixed group of people. But now the percentage of sub-Saharan African is actually 8% today, because it's mostly people from the Middle East. Arabian colonized the Mediterranean. It's like everybody around the Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, Cana. They're all Semitic people. It's really all the same people. But anyway, so I'm probably not from the ancient Egyptian. I'm probably related more to the mix that has more sub-Saharan African in it. Let's put it that way. Because I'm not an ancient Egyptian. Just to put it that way. So it's like, what is color, and what does color mean? And if you weren't here earlier when I told you about the Native Americans, and that's where we have the idea of red and white. They're white Native Americans, and red, nothing to do with the color of their skin. Had to do with whether they made peace with the colonists, waved the white flag, and the colonists were not called white. And the ones that were called red were the ones who the British lied to. And they said, they told them they were going to give them, if you fight for us, we're going to give you all your land back. So you mean the Britain sent the first slaves over to America? I mean, the first slave colonies. Actually, the first actual slave owner was Anthony Johnson, and he was African. He was African. Was an African American because wasn't America yet. But he was the first slave owner in America, by the way. You can look that up. So legally, when people were you were able to legally own people as slaves. It was under him. He went to court and had that done. But anyway, it was the first colonies. Jamestown was the first colony, and the British sent that over. So they were colonizers, and they wanted to colonize America. So you mean if they won the war, because the colonists wanted to have their own country, you mean to tell me that if the British won the war, they won the war and they were going to give it back to the Native Americans when the whole intention was to keep to set up the colonies and to rule and tax? They were taxing to death the colonists, and had the Boston Tea Party was because they wanted to take the guns away. They wanted to disarm the colonists. So obviously the colonists wanted to be free, wanted to have their own country. So they were lying to the Native Americans. That's why they got the Native Americans on their side to fight for them. So they were called red. They were not red-skinned, but they were, because the British were called the redcoats because they wore red coats. So they got the day. So if you were for the British, these were the red Native Americans. If you were for the colonists, you were called white, not because the colonists were white, but because you made peace, the flag of surrender or the flag of peace. You wave that flag, which means you want peace. You want to end the war. So the ones that made peace were called white. So it was actually the Native Americans who were first called white. And it had nothing to do with race. It had to do with which side you were on. So the whole idea from the Yellow River, and the Chinese are called supposedly yellow, but it's really because people who lived on the side of the Yellow River, the Caucasians, because you lived on one side of the Caucasus Mountains, versus the other side, it would be what we would consider, sub-Saharan African or Negroid, which is not, it's the technical term, like Caucasoid, hominid. It's the name of whoever made up these names, and we all came out of Africa, by the way. And if we have Neanderthal in us, It's either, everybody's either 0 to 4%. And people in the Western world have 2 to 3%. You're going to find a higher percent, but the most of us, at the most, we are 96% African. We're African, lost our color because the more when you move away from the equator, you get lighter and lighter, because when you're closer to the equator, your body produces a lot of melanin, because the body needs a certain amount of UV rays. Why? To create vitamin D, to prevent disease and birth defects. So if you have dark skin and you live in a climate that doesn't have much sun, like northern, you are probably going to get sick more often, and you're going to have to take vitamin D, high amounts of vitamin D, to prevent diseases, which you would naturally get closer to the sun. But as we moved up, we lost our color. We had color, we lost it. So our bodies, the lighter we were able, for the little amount of sunlight. I don't know why we moved up north. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. That is the stupidest thing any group. So maybe the fault of the white people, of the people who turned white, who lost their melanin, is the stupidity of moving north. What the hell did you do that for? But you have, the lighter the skin you have to have light skin, because there's so little sunlight, so you can absorb as much UV rays as possible. That's race. That's all race is. It's and your body will, because there's some people who are considered white because they come from white countries, but their skin is actually dark, but they're still considered white and privileged, but they're as brown as people, or more brown than people from countries who are considered not white. So why are they privileged? It's because of their ethnicity. Well, what if they come from poverty? What if they were serfs? And what if they were oppressed from noble people? Why are they considered privileged when they've never been privileged? Anyway, I hope I'm delighted when I see people, when I see that number count and I see people are watching me. I am so, and hopefully you're enjoying the information that was put out. I'm just trying to clear up the lies with history of religion, history of the world, just being honest about what religions have done. We know about how Christianity was perverted when it got to Europe. It's true, it was perverted, because the original Christian missionaries didn't do anything like that. They wouldn't have been able to sell Christianity. They sold Christianity to people who were oppressed by their religions. Paganism had a lot of human sacrifice and child sacrifice, not just in the Americas, but also around in the Middle East. So, and there was no value to the idea of value of human life came in with Christianity. And to those, so people, the poor people, the underprivileged people, took it in, because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sad, you consoled me. When I was sick, you comforted me. Lord, when I was naked, you clothed me. Lord, when did we do these things for you? He who does these things to the least of mine, he does it to me. Which means to the least of mine, to the least, how you treat the least, whoever you think the least is. If the progressives think the white people are the least, then they're doing it to God. If people who are white, who think that they're better because they're white, do something to someone who is, or noble and wealthy, royal, and they're in a lower class, they're doing it to God. Or if they're doing it because their skin has more melanin in it and they're oppressing them, they're doing it to God. And then the sheep and the goats, as the sheep said, but Lord, when did we do these? When we didn't know it was you. We did that. You did these things anyway, even though you didn't know it was me. And the goats, supposedly the sheep, without knowing him. The story is that the sheep, who didn't even know that it was God, just did it because it was the right thing to do. So you get into heaven. And the goats, it's a story. So the ones who did and the ones who didn't. I like goats. I think they're great. But the ghosts, supposedly the people who just, even though they didn't know it was God, had nothing to do with it, they didn't do the right thing to a stranger, who is the least of them, whoever you think the least is. And so he said, those are the ones who will be damned, because you did it to someone who just because you thought they were the least. And whoever you think is the least, you must treat them like you treat me. So it goes in all directions, no matter what religion, color, creed, ethnicity, race, doesn't matter. It's how you treat the least. I remember I dated, the first time I heard this, a long, long time ago. He was, began with a P. He was studying, anthropology and philosophy. And he said that you know that because you're alive, people in third world countries are dying because of your life. You're oppressing their life. So you're dying because of them, because you're alive. These turn out to be the same people who say, well, you're killing the planet. And we have to lower the population because you're killing the entire planet. And when I heard him say this, that I'm killing, I go, well, since you thought of this, I'm saying this to myself, you're telling me I shouldn't be alive and I should die because he's putting, this is the guilt before the what do you call it? You can't even say the word because I got the little thing, the Wikipedia thing at the bottom. You know what I mean? About the temperature possibly going up and killing, and me killing the planet. Just my life is killing people in other countries. And my cousin belongs to the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps was, John F. Kennedy said that if a rising tide lifts all boats, means that if America is strong, then we can go out and we can help other countries. They can trade with us, we can teach them. And that's what the Peace Corps did. They went out and they helped people in third world countries to bring their civilization up, to bring their being impoverished or not having proper medical care. And that's what my cousin did. He joined the Peace Corps, and my other cousin, his brother, joined VISTA, was to do the same thing in this country for the poor people. So the idea of, that's Marxism, that America is evil, the West is evil, you must kill it. But John F. Kennedy thought, with all his faults, and we know many of them, this was a good idea, because if we're strong and we're prosperous, then we go out and we can give more. When you have extra money, you're able to give more to the poor without hurting the poor. I mean, hurting yourself, right? They say, the studies showed that atheists give the least to charity, to the poor. And people who have any religion give more. And also, conservatives give more than Democrats. So see, the Democrats rely on the government doing it. But conservatives actually aren't. That way you can help people. Now we're so poor, we don't have enough money to help people and to be generous. And when we're generous and we give either our money or our time or just talking to someone, when we're poor, we feel good about ourselves. When we can affect good change in the world. And now we're so poor and we're so broken down that we don't even have the words, because we're so broken, to affect good change in the world. So they've really broken us in every way possible. And the government as we know, is funding wars. They're ignoring the people on the streets who are homeless because they're going to die anyway. The poor people in America, the SNAP benefits for the new arrivals are 3 to 4 times higher than a poor American. And of course, if you're homeless, it's like until you house the homeless, and most of them really, it's not just poverty, it's that they have some kind of psychological issue. And that's why they take drugs and drink, and then because they're self-medicating. And you think a liberal would understand that and help them. But it's like, no, you poor Americans, homeless, you're trash. Here's your free credit card. Here is SNAP benefits that are food stamps that are 3 to 4 times higher than the poorest of people. We will pay for your fuel. We will pay for your housing. They have laundry delivered. They have food delivered 3 times a day. Plus, they've given them foods so they can make their own food. Plus, they get food delivered through. And the jobs are because they can pay them less. So Americans aren't getting jobs. And so when they say the jobs are going up, but you see, if they get paid less, the government will subsidize. And who's the government? Us. They're throwing us away. They're throwing us away because we're privileged. And it doesn't matter what color skin you are. Everyone, or religion, no matter what they say about color, we're all being thrown away. Or religion, all being thrown away. And right down to the children, which they're butchering. Right down to the children. So, there is your lesson for tonight. God bless you, and thank you for being here. Let's see, well, when your worldview is one which nothing as meaning or value, why would you bother to help others when it's all meaningless? That's true. Reminds me of how my grandma, who was Black, was mistaken as a white woman, and how I've seen white people with skin color close to my own, which is like a creamy coffee color. It's it's we have to stop looking at skin color. We have to. I've told you before, you may or may not remember, that my cousin who started HRC, Human Rights Campaign, which is the LGBTQ. See, he belonged to VISTA, and his brother joined the Peace Corps. And he marched with Martin Luther King, and his poster was up in the South by the KKK. And they said, if you find him, kill him. Wanted, dead. And his mother was part German. He came out half Italian, but his mother was part German. And so he had blue eyes and curly blonde hair. You would never know he was Italian. And he didn't come out as gay yet either. And he said, when HRC started, that this will all end. Racism will all end. Homophobia, they didn't call it homophobia then, but what they were doing to gay people, discriminating against gay people, and they were subhuman. There was something wrong, defective with them, which I think the Democrats have figured out a way how to fix that. It's going to cost a lot of money, and you're going to be dependent on us. See, as if there's something wrong with it. Instead of saying, you're normal, accept yourself as you are. Yeah, you're normal. Go find love. They're not accepting, are they? Because they can make a lot of money. So he said, when you remove the word, or my black friend, or my gays, this girl, absolute liberal. I used to work with, not in the same department, but she kept saying, and even the people there were saying, I wish she would stop saying, my gay friend this, and my gay friend that, and my gay friend, this is how he dressed me. No earrings, this long, chunky necklace. And then she describes And then we were basically, we all looked at it and he says, why don't you just say your friend? And this is a long time ago. Why don't you just say your friend? Why do you have to say gay friend or my black friend or my Mexican friend or my, always put a label? And my cousin said, who started the whole human rights campaign, LGBT, now it's more than that, movement, said that when we get rid of all those labels, the day we just say my friend, my brother, my sister, my friend, my neighbor, just say their names, just say, or what they do for a living, that's when racism will end. That's when the discrimination against gays will end, or ethnicities, or whatever it is, class system. That's when it will end, when we stop no titles and no labels on people. And that's how it began. And now it's all about breaking us up into different communities, because united we stand, divided we fall. If we don't understand if people who come to this country don't understand, aren't made to learn English before they become citizens, and you just speak the language, nobody can understand each other. They keep us divided. Oh, they're racist against you. Oh, see these people, see the color of their skin. Oh, see their religion. They're racist against you, keeping us. But we're your friends. I thought that was, remembering that since childhood, when I first learned that from my cousin, who's much older than I was, who started this whole movement, the whole, because gay people didn't have rights. They were fired from jobs. They were oppressed. It was absolutely awful. So he used to get donations from people in Hollywood. There were gay people in Hollywood donate to try to get equality and try to remove labels. We were just human. We're all human beings, not our race, religion, color, or ethnicity, language that we speak, the creed that we follow, all these things. We're just human beings, and we're all equal. And that was the goal. And see how far we've fallen. We've gone back to the times of segregation. That's what it is, except they're segregating. It's not who they consider black and white. They're segregating race, religion, color. They just keep sexual preference. Everybody goes, oh, you go over here, you stay here, and everybody stays away from each other. And that way they're safe, because we won't unite and say, we think we're going to vote you out of office, and we've got some other people I think will do a better job. Keeps them in power. Anyway, God bless you, and thank you for listening to me and staying here this long. And I didn't want it to be a 4-hour stream, but I listened to the stream last night. First, I thought, oh, God, I just rabbled on. I go, God, I got some really good points. It was actually a lot, but a lot of good stuff. I was actually, it's like, oh, should I just take this down? Did I babble on? Oh, God, I don't want to annoy people. And I lost 2 subs. And I go, what did I do? My streams are too long. And you go, you know what? I sounded coherent and I made some good points. So I said, it's long, but I'm going to leave it up. I said, all right, I am proud about what I said. It came off well. You agree. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Spirit Sama. Good friend. You're a good friend of mine. Black Samurai is a good friend of mine. Good, you'll be through getting to know you through YouTube. You're good friends of mine. Can you make a note to check the chat more often, please? Oh, okay. All right. Was there something that you I usually these labels? Okay. Is there something? See if I can scroll up. Was there something? Let's see. Let me go back. What's with chopping up people or stories of a God being chopped up and giving blessings to people. Oh, say there's actually 2 manga I've read where a god is chopped up and grants people power, and the other one has parts of Jesus being scattered and giving people powers. Weird. Never heard of that before. But you'll find in I don't know if that's but let me see. It's I'll tell you the site. Went on Yandex, and I know about this, and what I did was I just researched it on the web. I've seen it, and I just wanted to make sure that when I brought it to you, that it's still out there, that you can find, that I'm not just talking out of my ass. Let's see, in Tanzania, body parts of albinos are a cash crop of sorts. A complete set of body parts, including limbs, genitals, ears, tongues, and nose, can sell for $75,000. The surge in the use of albino body parts as a good luck charm is a result of the kind of marketing exercise by witch doctors who propagate the myth that spiritual potions made out of albino body parts bring good fortune. And that's the site is modernghana.com. And Spell of the Albino, I believe is the name of the article. But that's true. If you're born, they believe in voodoo, the voodoo practice, they believe if even you are born of Black parents, sub-Saharan African parents, but you come out white, you come out an albino, you come out, so you're magical. In voodoo, you're magical. So they will chop. Sometimes they leave you alive, and they just keep chopping body parts off of you until there is no more. And they boil them, and they're good luck charms, and they boil them, they eat them, they make spells and potions out of them. So I don't know if that answers your question about that, or if that's something in the chat that I missed that you said about. Okay, check my question above about Oprah women. Say that probably related to at least one Black. Actually, there were interesting to know, there were 10,000 African American slaves or Black slaves that were owned by free African Americans. Believe it or not, so they weren't all white. Oprah Winfrey, LeBron James, and countless Black Americans are infinitely more wealthy than the average white American. That's right, and they own Obama, Oprah, Mark Zuckerberg with his compound, and somebody else. They were like billionaires. And the people of Maui, they didn't give a dime to. Neither did they give some of their land to, so they can live on it while their land is cleaned up from the poisons that were spilled. The fires blew things up and put poison the lands and the water. They're not even offering. Oprah owns 100 million acres. She's not offering a postage stamp of land to the indigenous people of what you're supposed to be. Remember, she wrote the book Caste, and she said that all white people, no matter how poor they are, belong to a high caste, and she, because she's Black, belongs to a low caste. You are the wealthiest woman in the world. C.W. Walker, turn of the century, she made hair products for African American women, and she became the first female millionaire in the entire world. African American woman, 1900. She wasn't like Oprah Winfrey and all the little things we hear about the school in Africa, what they did to the little girls. She didn't have any baggage like that, but she was, and turn of the century, former slave, made up her own company because African American women couldn't buy the hair products that was appropriate for their hair to do what they wanted to do with their hair. So she made it up, and she was the first millionaire in America, or female millionaire in America. Can you believe it? I think it was C.W. Walker was her name. And that's something to be incredibly. So it's like up from slavery, and Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and Frederick Douglass. I mean, it's like up completely from slavery. And there was 2 or 3 freed slaves that became Republican senators right after the Civil War. And it took till 2014 for the first African American to be a senator in the Democrat Party. But you already had the grand exalted cyclops of the West Virginia KKK, who was called the conscience of the Senate and the head of the Democrat Party in the 80s, Robert C. Byrd, who was the first African American president, and Joe Biden put this bronze statue up in the Capitol Rotunda, the most honored place of our nation, and Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Obama, and Biden eulogized him. And he would even say the word on television. He's like the whitest person I've ever seen. It's kind of like, do you ever see Elmer's glue? And then you've got the cow face on Elmer's glue. You could put Robert C. Byrd's or Pence's face on a bottle of Elmer's glue. That's how white this guy was. And it's like his statue was put up by our first. Actually, we're not going to have we don't have a first African. I want an African American president that is descended of slaves who went through all the pain and suffering their ancestors on both sides. That's the first African American president. We shouldn't throw this on. And the first biracial vice president was not Kamala Harris. It was Charles Curtis. He belonged to the Kaw tribe, and he was Herbert Hoover's vice president, who was a Republican. A Republican. Was that turn of the century? Republican. Had a first. I think he belonged to the nation, so he was considered 100% Native American. He was the Republicans. Nobody knows about that. So the hypocrisy that you're throwing the people of Maui away. Why? Because they're taking up land in Hawaii. And Biden gives them $700 and wouldn't have given them the $700 until he got $100 billion to go to Ukraine. It's like, what party is the party of racism? Please. Oh yeah, that's right. He picked Kamala. He can't be racist. He picked Kamala, who kept as a prosecutor in San Francisco. She was a prosecutor. She kept people in jail, minorities, people of color, in jail longer than their sentence, and withheld exonerating evidence to put them in jail, to keep them under slave labor. She basically kept minorities, Blacks and Hispanics, as slaves. And if you go to the Real Dana Show, I think it's the Real Dana Show, the Real Dana, that's the channel. Type in Judge Joe Brown. He was a judge on TV, and he's really smart. He's old now. I think he's about 75, and he will let the expletives fly. But he knows history, and he'll tell you all about Kamala and what her father says about her ancestry on the Jamaican side, and the truth about that, which I won't say, because yeah, really tune into the Real Dana Show. She's really good. She's African American, and she has African American guests on as well. Talk about what's going on in Chicago and how the Black people are suffering in Chicago because of the new arrivals. So that's a good show I try to catch every night, and it's a live stream. Sometimes he's not on, but listen to Judge Joe Brown. He's going to tell you the raw truth, and I think he would be on more channels, but he lets the expletives fly a lot. But you know what? He's like an uncle. He's like one of my uncles. One uncle that didn't swear. Actually, all of them didn't swear except for one uncle. And Angelo didn't swear. Uncle Vincenzo, he's the one who swore. He's kind of like the uncle that swears, but tells the God's honest truth, whether you want to hear it or not. So, but Moo America Bet, I'm probably... Was there, you said there was a question that I can... Do you believe Muslims will ever be able to reform Islam like Imam Tawadi wishes? The problem is there are Muslims that do want to reform. Except, like anywhere, like all history, people in power oppress the people below them. And it's said that the Quran has never been changed, and we know it. We know that what's his name? Took all the Qurans. You probably can remember the name quicker than me. I'm just like really tired and worried about my condition, whether I still have a roof over my head. Uthman took all. He noticed the Qurans were different, so Uthman gathered up all the Qurans and used the parts that he thought were real and put it together and burned all the Qurans. Yet there's some Qurans out there that differ from other Qurans. But the idea is that this Quran is the same as the one that's in heaven next to Allah, and it's all the same. But if it's the same, the earlier parts, the newer parts abrogate the earlier parts. So that means if it says one thing earlier and it says something that, is different later on about the answer to the same question or rule, the earlier parts don't matter. So if it was a perfect book, wouldn't it be perfect all the way through? That's the same thing as, the Joseph Smith, Mormonism. He was obsessed with Islam. Freemasonry, he took Freemasonry and was fascinated with Islam. And you notice how there's more than one. It was polygamy in Mormonism when it began until it wasn't the law of the land here. And Joseph Smith supposedly found the gold plates, which is the Book of Mormon, which Moroni, the angel, took back to heaven because it's the perfect plates that came from heaven. So it's the same story. So he used the same elements, which the story goes that he had this seeing stone, which helped him translate ancient Egyptian, some kind of he had a funny name for it. It wasn't ancient, it was something pre-Paleo-Egyptian or something. He made it up. And it's a seeing stone. He was just making it up. And he had somebody writing it. And the wife said, I think the wife said, it got destroyed by it. She was like, didn't trust what he was doing. She thought he was a shyster. He was. And she destroyed it. And he said, well, if you know it and it's true, you can just retranslate it, right? And he said, you can't really do that. I'm going to have to start over and bring through, because God doesn't want, since that's destroyed, whatever story that was. Well, if it's the same, it's going to be the same, But anyway, that's an interesting point that the two, and that's why even the Muslim name was Haney. He was really sexy. He's Egyptian Muslim, and he was bald, and he looked like an Egyptian Muslim. He's one of those really sexy. Didn't have sex. In fact, any of these Muslims, no sex. Yes, no sex. I was a good girl. A crumb I dated him when I was 17. He kept sticking his head out. He used to ride around with a Quran, and he dressed in all white, and he was very, very handsome, very dark skinned, and again with the white clothes. You knew he looked nice. And he kept sticking his head out the window, thanking God because I was for sending him a virgin. That's great. I'm still a virgin because I was a virgin, and he kept sticking his head. It was so funny. And when I picked up his Quran, and he was like, "Oh, you touched the Quran?" And it's like, "Did you wash your hands?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, my hands are clean." But because I was really interested in seeing it, because I was really interested in religion, even at I think I was 17 or 18. And it's like I was really interested, and I had a respect for it. I didn't realize that you had to, but you had to make sure your hands were clean. But my hands were pretty clean. But I thought that was interesting. But Haney said, was trying to sell Islam to me, saying, that it's exactly the same. It's the same as it's the same book that Allah has next to him. It's never been changed. Not like the Bible. It's never been changed. So when you feed this to people, since childhood over and over again, that the Bible is corrupted, even though Muhammad said early on, he said that if you have any questions, I'll go to the people of the book, and he sat on a different cushion. He got off the cushion and he put the Bible on the cushion. He said that the Bible is the one that if you have any questions. So you wonder, what was Islam like before Uthman changed it? But at the same time, when you hear stories about cities of Jews who were beheaded, he took a day and a night to behead all the men because they wouldn't convert. Or there's a city in Italy that the Saracen knights from Egypt, so my father's side, came over to terrorize. Actually, from the year 800 to 1300, my father's side terrorized my mother's side for 500 years. But don't worry, she got back at him. She didn't know about that bit of history, but she got back at him. She's hard to live with. So I think it's kind of funny. And some settled in Italy and said, well, if you settle here, you stay here. Even though they were terrorizing, they said some wanted to stay. Even though they had terrorized and fought, they said, well, you have to become Catholic. And they said, fine, because they were Christian originally in Egypt. And they probably didn't agree with the religion. But there's a city in Italy that the Pope made everyone in the city a saint because the Saracens went in and beheaded everyone because they wouldn't convert, even the women and children, to Islam. And I'm saying that if you knew Isbir Sama, people who know me, when I say that, I'm not, it's not damning Islam. I'm saying that if you say the fault of your ancestors, I could say there's a fault of my ancestors. Maybe you're not exactly related, but they put the same name on all the people, whether they're related or not. So I mean, might not be related. So it's possible if the powers that be fall. And then the people kind of look at things and say, and when they realize that Uthman destroyed all the Qurans and gave you his, and that maybe these hadiths over hundreds of years, because the Bible is the creeds. There are creeds that are early creeds, and that every 10 years language changes. And linguists can tell when something was written by the way the language was spoken in that particular time, that particular place. And there's the early creed about Christ being born of the Virgin Mary, dying under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, was buried, and rose again on the third day, rose again from the dead. This creed, they can date back to the cross. So as far as Christianity goes, unlike even Buddhism, it took over 500 years to start writing down the sayings of the Buddha. And then there was actually originally 500 sayings, and then it turned to 2,500 sayings. So we're not quite sure even if those sayings are the sayings of the Buddha. See how we can go on and on about religion a lot because I study religion. But as far as Christianity goes, they were written far closer to the time of Christ. And the first thing they did was go out and just repeat the stories. The first thing they did was, we better write this down or else it won't look authentic. That isn't the way things were passed by word of mouth. Even the Vedas, the Mahabharata, which is the world's longest epic poem, it was passed through chance. Things were passed like that. So it was normal for them to, whatever they remember, they went out and they passed it. They taught people that went as missionaries, and they kept they did was they just kept repeating their memories over and over and over again. And then when it finally came down into books, there are similarities between the four gospels, is because people had the same memories. And notice how you can, the fathers of the church, you can date the Bible back. They say, well, we don't have the actual Bible that goes that back all the way. But even though, like I said, the creed, you can, through linguists, the way language changes every 10 years, you can date that back to the cross. So those are the creeds that were repeated, because through the Gospels, you'll find several creeds, many creeds, and those creeds they can date because the language is the same and it's unchanging. The way the words, expressions, you notice that every 10 years our expressions and meanings of words and things change. It's been the same with things throughout time, and that's how they can date languages themselves and how far back a language goes. But as far as they say, well, there is no book. Well, first of all, books from that time on parchment paper, it's very hard to survive for 2,000 years. But what we do have, we have the letters of the fathers of the church, and they would write each other. They would write in different towns, different countries. They would write each other letters because they kept in tune with what they wanted to keep up with the religion, to make sure they were passing the religion on correctly, the teachings correctly, how the churches were running. Are the people getting the messages? Are they understanding it? The teachings as Christ taught them. So they would write letters to each other. And we have these letters. And even Bart Ehrman, who every time he writes a book, he kind of changes what he says before. But you says this, and we can quote you on this, but now you're saying this now. So it's kind of like all over the place. But anyway, it sells books and it makes money. Even he admits that if you find these letters, they are quoting the Gospels. They will quote the Gospels in these letters back and forth. And if you take all these letters and you pull all those quotes out, you can put together all four Gospels. It's all in there. And so it does go back, but it doesn't go back in a book together. It goes back because they remembered all these teachings. They remembered all of it, and they were quoting it back and forth. And another thing is that, Bart Ehrman also said that even with all the textual variations, and there's thousands, but there's more textual variations because the Bible is the most produced book of all time. There's more copies of the Bible than there's been anything else that's been translated into many, many languages. So you're going to find textual variations, and most of them are like phrasing things a little differently, or spelling Catherine with a C than a K, rather than changing the story. And even Bart Ehrman says that with all of the variations put together, it doesn't change the meaning of the story of the Gospels. It doesn't change the meaning at all. So that's good. And another thing that dates the Gospels closer to the time of Jesus, with all the Gospels, let's say they were written after 100 years after Jesus or 150 years after Jesus, right? Jesus said that not one stone in this temple, tear this temple down and I will rebuild in 3 days. Not one stone will remain on top of another. And he's looking at the temple. And they go, what do you mean? It took hundreds of years to build this temple and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days. What do you mean? He predicted that the temple would be torn down and not one stone would be on top of another, which occurred in 70 AD. He predicted that. That's one of his prophecies in the Bible. Now, if you were making a story up or you were writing it 100 years after or after 70 AD, wouldn't you say, Jesus said it and miracle of miracles, guess what had happened? The Romans tore down the temple, threw the stones over the walls, and not one stone is standing. Jesus said it. Here's proof. He must be God. He saw that. John is supposed to be the oldest out of all the Gospels, right? So he supposedly wrote he's the latest. Not once does it speak about the temple falling. So if this was written after the fact, wouldn't they, instead of writing, oh, Jesus said this, they wrote, Jesus said, not stone top, and nobody said, wait a second, hey, it came true. It means that the Gospels, they stopped writing the Gospels before the temple fell in 70 AD. There isn't a hint of it in Paul or anywhere, or any of the later church, nothing. It's just Jesus said it, and there's no look back at saying Jesus said it, and guess what? It happened. So they would have, if you were making this up, if you were writing this later, you would say, and it happened, and in 70 AD, as you're ending the Gospels, the Romans tore the temple, just like Jesus said, hallelujah, he's the Messiah. Wouldn't that be like the kicker? Wouldn't that be the thing that just put just absolutely, Christianity is absolutely true. They didn't do it, which proves that the Gospels were written before 70 AD. And the creeds go back to the cross, according to linguists. As much as it seems impossible, and you can not believe that the story is true or not, but the fact that they went out after a failed Messiah, there was a lot of Messiahs that were killed, that died, fighting, wars. They fought wars against the Romans, they just died. And nobody resurrected them. Nobody continued their story. Nobody did anything. They just disappeared. The fact that they got up, they said they received the Holy Spirit. Women were at the tomb, which were worth 50% of that as a man, and couldn't be witnesses in court. That they actually wrote that the women were there and that they were hiding. It's a crazy thing for a men of that day who look at women that way. I think it's because Jesus' children were 50% of the worth also. They weren't. That's why Jesus says, let the children come to me. Don't let the children suffer. Let them come to me. Great is a child. You become like a little child. Great are you in heaven. Should you harm a hair in the head of these children, it'd be better a millstone be tied around your neck and you'd be tossed in the ocean. If you even think of harming a child. That's a good religion. Because that's, anyway. So he rose, he marginalized people, poor people. He lifted up poor people that in society and in the culture were nothing, which goes against the Pharisees. See, the Essenes broke away from the Pharisees. The Essenes went, and they're the ones who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They lived near the Dead Sea, and they didn't agree with temple sacrifice. So this isn't against the Jews. It's nothing to do against the Jews. There was a split in Judaism, and also the Samaritan split as well from the temple. The priests were considered very corrupt of that day and made up a lot of things to make a lot of money. So it wasn't the Jews, and it wasn't, because a lot of Jews followed Jesus. It was the ruling class, ruling class who think they're better than the people under them, and they oppress the people under them and get money, lots of money by taxing everything, because you have to buy this and you have to do that, and to get the ritual and to be clean, money. You have to, and it has nothing to do with Judaism, money. It was just like any ruling class, any king, any corrupt priests of any religion, all the, throughout history, it's the same story. That's why the Essenes broke away from them. They disagreed with the temple sacrifice. They said, God never asked for this. The Samaritans disagreed with them, and they broke away. So it's just this particular set of priests were corrupt. That's all. And Jesus had an issue with them. So that was the culture of the day. So it was kind of absurd for them to write women as a witness, to even say that a failed Messiah that was crucified rose again from the dead without people looking at them cockeyed. But they believed. And the reason why they believed is because that's the day that of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit fell upon their heads and entered their bodies, and they were filled with strength and zeal and, miracles. They were working miracles, and just the feeling of someone that's got the Holy Spirit flowing through them and around them. It's like you can feel it. It's tangible. God is real. I've received the Holy Spirit. It's like I thought the priest was next to me, and yet he was all the way at the end of the line, because I could feel this. It was like a solid pillar. It felt like a solid swirling pillar of fire that you could, if you wanted to knock on it, you could knock. It was real. And I go, God, he must be right here. I feel this. And I opened my eyes and I saw that it was all the way down there. Why do I feel? I can feel it. And I go, gee, if atheists felt this, they would totally believe in God. So I can see where, and then when I received the Holy Spirit, it was like, I felt like I was drinking like liquid gold, and it was swirling down my lips, down my throat, and swirling in my heart. It kept swirling, and so I go, this is real. And even if I stopped, I said, I should meditate while I'm feeling and keep on my knees. And I got tired. I sat back and I go, I'm still feeling it. I should go back on my knees because I have the Holy Spirit. And I'm just feeling this, even though I'm thinking other things. I go, I'm not trying to create this. This is just this experience. So I can imagine that when they received the Holy Spirit, that people could feel it. It was tangible. So even though what they were saying was absurd, a failed Messiah that was crucified as a criminal, women said that he appeared to a woman, and in that culture, a woman was nothing, and her witness statement was nothing. Women. How absurd. Why would you write that? But thousands of people we know that thousands of people historically, we can go back, we know that thousands of people were converted. All these nations were converted because they could feel it. And once you receive it, you can really feel it, and it's tangible, it's solid, it's real, and it's moving, and it's like fire, a fire that doesn't burn. So that's the reason. that's the spread of Christianity. But I know many Christians hate when people say this, but if you look at the Greek New Testament, Paul says there are women that are deacons preaching the gospel along with him. That's right. That's right. That's right, because Jesus treated women. He had women followers, and in fact, he had women, and they say of their own means, that gave that donated to his ministry, because obviously they were traveling, they needed to eat, so they were helping along. But he had women that were like a band of women, female apostles, but he didn't send them out to these countries because these countries would have killed them. They would have raped them. There were things like temple prostitutes, and it wouldn't have, he, instead of doing that, it's sending the men was more protecting the women, but women still were deacons and had to be protected more than men, because obviously men are stronger than women. It's just different. And also there was people might not have accepted Christianity as such, so that's why men kind of took over the whole thing. But it is true. Thecla was the name of one of the women. Thecla. One of the first saints is Saint Cecilia, who was a Roman, and she was betrothed, and she said she wanted to remain a virgin, and because St. Paul believed that Christ was coming back and everybody should stay a virgin, nobody should have any sex, and she wanted to remain a virgin, and so she's the patron saint of music because she sang a song of love to Jesus, and the man she married made a vow of celibacy too. And the Romans, because of her Christianity and her fervent devotion, they went to her. She was a noble woman, and they went to kill her in her marble bathroom. And they were trying to chop her head off. And because she was so beautiful, they couldn't chop her head off all the way. They just left her to die. It took her 3 days to die on the floor. She bled to death. They say that her hand said fingers of 3 in 1. She died professing her faith. In the pain, she died professing her faith. Three in one person, one God, 3 divine natures. And her body is still, they consider, incorrupt every year on her feast day, which is November 22nd, in fact, the day that John F. Kennedy was shot, and the anniversary, my parents' anniversary, believe it or not. That's feast day of Saint Cecilia, her entrance to heaven. So every year they bring the marble slab with her body contorted and laying on it. They bring it up and they lower it. So there were a lot of women who are considered saints, right at the beginning, because Jesus changed things. He raised children up to be valuable, and even more valuable, because if you become like that, you're great in heaven. If you harm a child, be better that you be thrown in the ocean before you even commit the sin and die. And he raised women up. That's why he had a band of women followers that listened to and believed in him, and Mary Magdalene, who anointed him, Mary of Bethany. Women were equal. So that's why Christianity was very different than the other religions of the time, even Buddhism. In Buddhism, a woman cannot become enlightened in a female body. She must reincarnate as a man. If you are a nun, Buddhist nun for 50 years, and a young male novice comes in that's 13 years old, you must bow to them. They are above you. So as much as the West has embraced yoga and Buddhism, and of course yoga actually comes out of Hinduism, but people think it's Buddhism, actually a Hindu. It's a prayer. It's actually a prayer, and we use it as exercise, but it's actually a morning prayer to God. We kind of mess things up. So we look at Buddhism and the lotus, and we think, oh, this is so feminine, the lotus, and Buddhism, Christianity is against women. And when you go all the way back, you realize how women were. Jesus, Mary was the apostle to the apostles, and he appeared to her first. which says a heck of a lot. Well, the men were hiding scared. So were the men higher, or was she honored in a very, very special way? I mean, the first woman. And God chose a woman. God could have made Jesus out of dust, but he chose a woman. And it was the flesh that a woman gave that was sacrificed. The sacrifice of his flesh and blood that is applied to save all our souls. He chose a woman that came from a woman's body, gave it to him. And it was born, so there was no male genitalia involved. Born naturally out of a woman's genitalia. Buddha was born out of the side of his mother, because in that culture, it's considered a clean birth, because she was impregnated, and when a person is pregnant, the pregnation comes from the male genitalia, pops into the woman's womb, but it's out, pops, but not out of the female genitalia, right? But he had a clean birth, so he was born out of the side of the mother. So I was a cesarean. They consider a cesarean. I was told people from that culture, oh, that's a clean birth, because you were not born out of the genitals of the mother. But in Christianity, it's the absolute opposite. There was no male genitalia involved at all. It was just the woman. The Holy Spirit entered the womb of a woman. He grew in the womb of a woman into the egg, the ovary, the egg of the woman. The flesh was given from Mary, from a woman. And that's the flesh and blood. That's where he got the flesh and blood, to reconcile God to man, that washes our sins and saves our souls. And he came out. He came out of natural birth, out of only female genitals. So he came to right a wrong. He ended temple sacrifice, which was terrible, because they brought the best of the best, and the priest ate the finest bits of meat, and everybody had literally, after they slaughtered and all the blood, they were cooking and eating it was just like, this isn't a temple. So he corrected that. That ended. He said, in church we sacrifice wine and bread, wine and leavened bread. There's no animal or blood or flesh. Wine and bread. It's consecrated. God enters it. God, and so then we can kneel back and we commune with. We can take God in. As I took the Holy Spirit in, I felt it entered. Actually, the top of my head and my mouth. It was two, and God enters you and goes into your heart. So it's like you have. So you can kneel back and think about that you have received God. Communion means that you're communing with God. God and you are one, and so we feel so disconnected by God, from God, all the time, that we need time to actually stop. And it's you to take in something that has been blessed. And as Christ said, this is my body, this is my blood. And he said to the apostles, don't marvel, they were scared when they heard, this is real, my blood is real drink and my flesh is real food. Don't marvel, don't be scared of what I tell you. He really meant and to do this, and that he would bless it, he would enter it. So that way because we need tangible, because we don't see God, we don't feel God, we feel disconnected. God knows that we need something tangible, something we can see, something we can feel. So that action of going in a state of, supposed to be a state of, after you confess your sin, your soul, and you feel like I've done wrong and I regret it, and you pray after receiving absolution it's a blessing from the priest. You unburden yourself because you've sinned against mankind. God knew that when he said to the apostles, how many times when they come to you, forgive them. How many times should we offer them, forgive them, so Lord? And they said 7 times, and Jesus said 7 times 77, which means as often as possible. He meant so people can go and unburden themselves. Because when you sin, either you sin, sometimes we just sin against ourselves, but we sin against mankind, or humankind. We sin against ourselves. So you kneel and you humble yourself to humankind. And so that's it. The priest is supposed to represent Christ, and the priest is supposed to forget everything that he's heard. So it's you can go, you did the sin. So it's like you take a little extra step as, because I did something wrong, I'm going to go walk to church. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to kneel down before God, and I'm going to burden myself to mankind, to a human that's supposed to keep it secret. And because you've also sinned against yourself, you're humbling yourself to mankind and to God, and you just say what you've done, and the priest said, I absolve you, and he blesses you, and you receive that blessing, and it's like a weight lifted off your shoulder because you receive a blessing. That way you receive the blessing, and you've done something. Let's say you did something wrong. Well, you do need to do a few extra steps. You regret it, and you want to, in a way, pay for your sin. And it's really not much. And he's like, we whip you, we're going to whip you or knock you on it. It's nothing like that. So basically you receive the absolution, and then the priest will say, okay, for your sins, what you need to do is you sinned only because you were disconnected from God. You were away from God. You left, you forgot he was there. You forgot that God was in your heart. So you kind of moved away from God, and you kind of strayed, didn't you? So the way to fix it, the Catholic Church is, the way to fix it is you kneel down to God, because he's supposed to represent God, but also he represents humanity, because the sin is against humanity and yourself. And so you get your blessing, he absolves you, and he said, now I want you to, you go kneel and you say these prayers. Why? Because you're supposed to sit with and kneel before God and to pray. And what do you do when you pray? And maybe the more prayers, depending on how grave the sin is, but it's still like never more than 10 minutes. So you can get you straight, so you can spend time with God. Your problem was that you weren't spending enough time with God. And to rectify it is to go spend time with God. To talk to him. Praying is talking to him. And especially when you say the Hail Mary, you're saying the scripture. You're repeating over and over again the moment that God has picked her to conceive and bear the Savior of the world. The moment that the Holy Spirit has entered her womb to conceive and bear the Savior of the world, that God is conceived into humankind to save us all. The Holy Spirit is all about reliving that moment of the conception of Jesus Christ. So that's why that prayer is important. Of course, glory be to the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, who, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. That God has always been and always will be. And you announce that God is and always will be. And you say the Our Father is another prayer he'll tell you say, which is the prayer that Christ gave us. So you're spending time with God. You're remembering what God taught you. You remember who God is, and you remember that he came down to sacrifice himself to wash your sin away. To wash your sin away because it's so important, because he wants you to be with him. He wants you to be with him. He wants you to be close to him. That's why it's so important. You sinned, but it's a great, you sinned, but it's a great thing when you realize, yes, I sinned. I feel terrible. And now I'm going to go back to God. And I'm going to spend more time with him. And I'm going to get close to him. And I'm going to feel how it feels to be blessed and in his presence and feel the Holy Spirit. So I can never leave him again. But if I fall again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the whole thing. And I can spend some time with him. So as bad as it is to sin, every time you come back, it's a good. So this whole thing about we don't need to go confess, that's the whole purpose. That's the whole reason why, because psychologically we need to talk as human beings. That's why we go to psychologists. We have a friend to unburden ourselves to. You're going to another human being to unburden yourself. When you can't tell anyone else, you want anyone else to know what you did? You tell someone that's supposed to forget and knows that they are in the position of Jesus Christ for you. So you can, because we need that as humans. I want to tell Jesus Christ. And I also need to humble myself to mankind because I sin against mankind, whether it's just against me that is sinning against mankind. So it's our opportunity to unburden ourselves and talk to somebody. And there's a screen, and you can go to a different church. They don't have to ever know who you are. There's ways to do things just in case you think, my priest will know who I am. You can go anywhere. You can go anywhere, and they do not know who you are. And the parishioners there, they're from another church. They don't know who you are either. So don't even worry about that. But it's like going to a psychologist to unburden yourself. And then you get a blessing and you feel clean. And then you just go in the pew, kneel, and spend some time with God. Think about God's prayers. Think about God's internal existence, so the glory be. Think about God's incarnation into the womb of Mary so he can sacrifice. He sacrificed himself to forgive your sin. Why? So you can come back to him. So you can be with him forever because he loves to spend time with you. So he knows even if you keep sinning, it's great because you'll come back and spend time with him. And that's all he wants, really. Anyway, God bless you. And I hope I answered your question, Spirit Sama. See, every question always, I remember more things about scripture and God, and there's always more things that come because I love to be connected to God. And so I can speak about all sorts of religions because that's what I do. I'm looking at my bookshelves, books falling over, all about religion. But you could say I certainly do know about Christianity a heck of a lot. But God is very important. And I love to know how people come to God. So let's see if there's anything else. So there's also whiteness of Muhammad in the text. Yeah, you must have seen that. Did you see the show of David Wood, Spirit Sama? I hope I caught all your questions. Sam, where are you? Right here, bro. Okay, hello there, Three Stooges. God bless you for joining me. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Oh, I did answer all your questions. Good. All righty. So, if there's more questions, do you notice I love to talk about history. I love to learn about history, but I also can talk about God forever. There's always an answer. I mean, there's you open yourself to God and you ask God, ask and you receive, seek and you will find. You just ask. God will give you the answer. I don't believe I know all this from reading, though I know a lot from reading and studying, but it's also about you sit and you think and you spend time with God and you ask God, I want to understand this. And then God gives you a knowing, an understanding. So you understand deeper and more. And this is what he's there for. Hello there, Razor X the Pig. It's good to see you. We're about to close. I hope you've been here longer because I'm about to close out the show. But God bless you for joining us. It's turned into a Bible meeting. It's turned into a show about God. But that's all you have to do is just you read scripture, you think about God. You think about what God would want or what God would want you to do. You just ask questions. You just spend some time with God and you think about it and you just want to know the answer. And then you get the information comes to you. And then, wow, how did I know this? Because God's talking back to you. That's the reason why you know it. See, bless you as we, Felina. Well, God bless you. God bless you, Razor X Pigard, and anyone on Rumble. If there's anyone, this is streaming on Rumble. So if there's anybody streaming on Rumble, they don't show me on Rumble who pops in. And what I'll do is I'll pop right into Rumble after this because the chat disappears after the stream, but it's there for a few minutes. So I'll pop over to Rumble just to see if anybody has left any questions or said anything in the chat, and I'll answer them if there's anybody there at this time. So God bless you, and please pray for me that I don't lose the roof over my head because the 20th is the due date. I don't have a dime to pay them. So I wish I could give them something, but I don't have a dime. So just pray that they're patient with me and they give me time to pay. So yeah, Thursday is the due date. And I have nobody wealthy to ask for help. I don't know anybody wealthy. So anyway, so do say a prayer for me. I would appreciate that if you could. I don't know. It's a safe place to live. It's a very safe place to live in. The world is getting not safe, more and more not safe. If I go and find some place, I didn't even know if I could afford any place, but even so, it might not be safe. And I might not be able to have a dog, and I'll be talking to God. I'll say, talking to the wall. I'll be talking to God. But if anybody sees me, they'll say, she's crazy. Look at her talking. I'm not ready. So please say a prayer for me. I would appreciate that. If only if I had more subs and more views, YouTube would allow ads and I would get revenue for that, or they would let me, the money. Sometimes people want to give you $5 or a few dollars, but I don't have enough subs or views. It's like I'm totally shadow banned. So I can't make money this way, so it's like or through YouTube, I can't do it, but through the kindness of strangers. But pray that maybe there's somebody that's going to come along, or that the city will have patience with me. Just have patience with me and let me keep a roof over my head in a safe place. That's all I ask. Okay, God bless you, and thank you so much for joining me. All of you, Three Stooges, Razor, X Pigart, Dear Spirit Sama, and Black Semina, you're all dear to me. You're all good. And anybody who has not left a message in the chat, God bless you, and thank you for joining in. And say an extra prayer for me is all I ask. Patience. The city gives me patience. Patience and time. Anyway, God bless you. I love all of you. Thank you for joining me. Good night. There's Dear Black Samurai. Dear Black Samurai is going to pray for me too. Thank you so much. God bless you. It's in Razor X. Everybody say the Razor X. Too. God bless you. Thank you so much. So I'll say good night. And I love you, and I'll be back soon. Okay.